Hello everybody and welcome to this week's Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. It is Saturday the 21st of May and you're joined by myself, Philip Nothard.
And me, Curtis Hutchinson. This is episode 26, season 8 of Motor Trade Radio, bringing you all the chatter that matters. Once again, we've gathered together this week's big car retailing stories across the franchised and independent sectors for you to enjoy all in one place, on demand, on your podcast feed.
A few shout-outs this morning, haven't we, Curtis? We've got an exclusive this week from Judge Service, who are identifying the top 12 performing regions in the UK for customer satisfaction with their local dealers. Can't wait to get to that one.
Yeah, we'll get to that shortly. Also, it's worth a shout out for last weekend's Robert Forrester interview, which we actually made it available as a standalone episode during the week because there was so much interest in it. So that's actually live on your podcast feed, and it is worth a listen. We actually spent longer with Robert than we thought we would. So ostensibly it was an interview about his 4-year results. But it was a lot broader than that, wasn't it? I mean, he was in a very sort of, he was keen to just talk about whatever we asked him about, really.
Yeah, and I think some of the feedback I've had, one, the openness of the chat with Robert, and like you say, into the sort of the broadness of it, but actually some people that actually operate within the industry in some function or another, they said that they learnt more about the industry in that sort of 40 minutes than they have done by reading much material. So, you know, it's been great insight there, because particularly when he started talking about profitability and started talking about agency model and commissions and things like this, it got into a very interesting conversation.
It did, yeah, and without acting as a spoiler, it is worth heading over there if you didn't catch it on last weekend's show or the standalone, because as you say, he does talk about agency model, extended warranties. He has some really interesting comments on extended warranties and the falling 3-year car park. I was talking about service plans, new and used car sales. And also there was a fascinating story about how he became a talent scout, but I'll leave that one there. You need to go and listen to the full show to find out the full story there.
Definitely. And as always, if you'd like to get in touch with us or come on the show yourself or send us a press release even on anything, then please do contact us at motortraderadio@yahoo.com. Or you can join us on the Motor Trade Radio LinkedIn group, or follow us on Facebook, Twitter, or LinkedIn with Curtis or myself.
And before we go over to the headlines, as we record this, we received a press release this morning about the Consumer Confidence Index from PM. And some interesting stats in here, isn't there, Phil?
Yeah, and I mean, it's the obviously the retail sales has come out at the same time as the latest Consumer Confidence Index from GfK, and retail sales volumes, including petrol, have risen 1.4% month to month in April, and that was above consensus of a minus 0.3. So we know this is where, this is adding to the pressure of inflation that came out earlier on in the week at 9%. So there's a lot of pressure there. But, and at the same time, we've got a consumer confidence index, which is done by GfK. And that fell from minus 38 in April, again, to a further minus 40 in May. And that was ahead of the consensus that they expected it to be at minus 39. But that's the lowest figure since the UK has felt in terms of consumer confidence since 1974. So I think in general, we're not doing too bad as a sector against some of the headwinds we're facing.
Yeah, but I guess that's the real headline figure, isn't it? It's that minus 40 in May. So,
it's there's a lot of pressure on at the government at the minute, isn't there, to sort of stabilise that between interest rate rises, cost of living, and inflation. And we can't get through a day without some kind of headline and commentary around politics. But we'll stay away from that. Well, maybe we should have asked Robert Weiss, who was on last week, about his political view on the market, but that would have been a longer interview, I think, with Robert.
Well, You know what? At the end of the interview, I think I said to you, we had enough to go into a part two. And someone on social media actually got in touch with me and said, I'm really looking forward to part two.
We better get them on then.
Yeah, unfortunately, there is no part two.
No, we could do. Yeah, we'll speak to Robert. Let's try and get Robert back on and talk a little bit further about other things. But I'm sure he'll be more than happy to do so. But right, what have we got in the headlines this week? Because we've got an interesting array of headlines this week.
Yes, so headlines this week are from AM, Car Dealer, Motor Trade News, and The Guardian, starting with a What Car report finding that 2/3 of car buyers will never buy a diesel. Used car dealers have a key lesson to learn from the digital disruptors. Local charger availability is hampering dealer ability to retail EVs. Perry's have delivered a 275% pre-tax profit in what they describe as an excellent 2021. We look at why big car makers are stuck in the slow lane over the switch to zero emissions. And as you mentioned, we have an exclusive this week from Judge Service looking at dealer satisfaction by regions.
Yeah, so we'll head over to AM Online, and the story, as you say there, Curtis, is from What Car, and a survey they've done that 2/3 of car buyers will never buy a diesel, saying that only 5% of car buyers plan to purchase a diesel-powered model, and 2/3 said they'd never buy one, according to the survey. And this was a research that comes after April new car registration figures, which we talked about on a previous podcast there, that talked about, obviously showed that electric cars have outsold diesel now for more than a factor of the two so far this year. So it's we're seeing that decline of diesel continuing, isn't it, going forward?
Yeah, and it's worth, you're right, it's worth giving this story just a little bit of context, because in the first 4 months of the year, diesel registrations accounted for just over 30,400 units, compared with over 77,000 of pure battery electric vehicles. So diesel, but believe it or not, has a market share in the year to date of just 6%. And Phil, you and I remember when it was around 50%.
50-60%, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Diesel used to be half of the market. So the research that What Car did was it was a survey of 910 in-market new and used buyers, and it found that of the new car buyers surveyed, just 5% said they were looking at a new factory-ordered diesel car, while 21% of used buyers were considering a diesel as their next car. So obviously more prevalent in the used car market, but in total, 89% of all car buyers surveyed said they were considering fuel types other than diesel. And of these, 66% were confident they would never, ever buy a diesel car in the future, while 22% said they weren't sure.
Yeah, you remember the days where everything was pushing towards diesel? It was the fuel type to have, wasn't it? That and how things have changed. But as you say there, that 34% said they'd even avoid diesel because they don't believe that it's environmentally friendly, and 20% even said that they wouldn't suit their needs either. So very interesting in terms of that requirements of a diesel, not necessarily about the environmental impact it has, and another 17% that said that other fuel types are now more cheaper to run, interestingly. So that's obviously your hybrids and potentially some of the petrols and your electric in many ways.
Yeah, and interesting comment there from Steve Huntingford, who's the editor of What Car, who says diesel's rapid decline in sales comes as manufacturers continue to offer fewer models to new car buyers, which is actually a key factor. And he goes on to say that Vauxhall was the latest manufacturer to drop the diesel option on its best-selling Corsa, with the car now only available in petrol or fully electric. And that's really the sort of direction of movement at the moment. We are seeing a lot of diesels dropping off ranges, car ranges, and manufacturers concentrating on petrol and, of course, EVs and plug-in hybrids.
Be interesting how far the hashtag Dieselgate still operates in social space. Do you remember the year after year? I mean, we were talking
Yeah,
about it for
yeah.
years, weren't we? That whole Dieselgate when that hit, and that really significantly sort of painted that drop in diesel shared into it at the time with everything going on, and it went on for many years and has never recovered, has it? I mean, it's
No.
it hit all that, and then we obviously had the onset of EV. So yeah, lots going on. But I suppose the next story is the question: are we ready for this onset of electric vehicles? Are we ready to drop the diesel and move towards electric? Is the big question out there, Curtis, at the minute?
Yeah, so the story here is from Motor Trade News, and the headline is Local Charger Availability Hampering Dealer Ability to Retail EVs. And there's quite an eye-catching photograph that accompanies this story, Phil, because it's you.
It's a bit old, yeah. The younger me, I think, that one.
The younger you.
Well, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, so the story is, it's about poor availability of charging facilities on a local basis is hampering this ability of dealers to retail both new and used electric vehicles to a surprisingly large degree. And this is based on a release that you put out with the Vehicle Remarketing Association over the course of the week, wasn't it?
Yeah, we had a members meeting with the VRA, as you say there, with the Vehicle Remarketing Association, and when we got into the discussion of around EV and the onset of the volumes that are coming, because we're talking about this market share of new EVs, but obviously that then results in increased used EVs entering the sector, and particularly from a remarketing association perspective, it's they're coming into that sector, that all wholesale and remarketing world, and we sort of were talking around: are we ready for this kind of volume? Is the sector ready for this kind of volume? And mainly, is the consumers and the infrastructure ready? I mean, it's a big question out there as to how many apps you need on your phone to ensure that you've got enough coverage of access to charging points. Secondly, whether those charging points are in use or working when you do get to that charging point. And thirdly, how much you pay, depending on which charging point, where it is, and who's the supplier, is how much you pay per kilowatt for charging your electric vehicle as well. So there's a lot of questions still coming out about the world of electrification and what that market will look like. I mean, clearly, it is transitioning and the move is very swift now. But there still seems to be a lot to do to get the market ready, and particularly in that dealer world and the consumer confidence in EVs. But I mean, you picked up something this week around what Tesla have done and where that might help, I think, a little bit.
Yeah, I did. So it was widely reported in the press that Tesla, and they hinted that they would be doing this some months ago, and that they had been piloting it in continental Europe. But they're actually opening up 15 of their supercharger sites to non-Tesla vehicles. And that actually, 15 supercharger sites doesn't sound a lot, but that actually includes 158 chargers, which is about 20% of the Tesla UK charging network. So drivers wanting to access these chargers, they need a Tesla app. You mentioned about apps, so it's another app. But, yeah, another one. Yep, they'll need a Tesla app, and then they have a choice of taking out a membership at $10.99 a month, which will give them a lower cost per kilowatt, or they can opt for a higher rate for the kilowatts without a subscription. So there's a bit of flexibility there, but it does open up the supercharger network to drivers who until now would have been unable to access these chargers. And having done a fair bit of motorway driving over the past month or so, the Tesla network is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
If you stop at motorway services, there is a bank of Tesla superchargers there, and because the volume of Tesla cars has increased, as we report on a monthly basis, they're getting busier and busier. So even more so now that
I was
they're
going to say
going
that, yeah.
non-Tesla vehicles. But I guess that this story in particular highlights this concern that a lot of buyers have over their ability to home charge, because if they're buying a battery electric vehicle, then they are thinking, I need to charge it at home. And that's quite a difficult mindset to change, isn't it? Because it was never an issue with petrol or diesel. You didn't refuel at home. But, it is a totally different mindset now.
It is. It's a change of behaviours entirely. And I think, you and I were talking before the recording about, we're hearing more and more where businesses are enforcing EVs onto their company car drivers. Now, that enforcement isn't always the case that actually there's thought around whether that employee or driver of that vehicle can charge that vehicle at home, etc., or whether they've got the infrastructure around them to be able to charge it. It's basically a policy has moved because, one, it's tax efficient, two, it's positive on the balance sheet in terms of the fuel savings and costs there, but actually it's down to the driver to make sure that they can charge that vehicle,
yes,
for doing their daily requirements of driving. So you can see where it's coming, and you mentioned that it seems to be kind of reversal on where we've headed in terms of company car use.
Yeah, in that you can end up with soulless fleets. So I mean, my background before I edited Motor Trader was in the fleet press, and a lot of the people we used to talk to had soulless fleets, be they soulless Fords, soulless Vauxhall. Whereas now, there is an emergence of soulless Tesla fleets, if you can believe that, and it is a changing dynamic. So it's going to be interesting to see how this one pans out. But anecdotally, I mean, how do dealers address this sort of local recharging issue? And I did some work with a VW dealer, and Volkswagen have a partnership with Tesco. So a number of Tesco sites across the country have charging facilities for VW customers. So part of their test route, this particular dealer, part of the test route was a stop at Tesco's to recharge and have a coffee. So anyone doing the test drive would appear at Tesco's, pull up, they'd be met by someone from the dealership who would talk them through, this is how you would recharge. And part of that was to show how recharging can become part of your normal day-to-day activities, and that you didn't have to be dependent on charging at home.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great idea, isn't it? Because there's always the question around the education of the consumer around EV. So I think you're right. I think what a great idea that is, where part of the test drive is education of how you do it, how easy it is, and and that customer engagement as well, to be able to do that, pop into Tesco, have a coffee and things like this whilst it's on charge. So I mean, you're sort of ticking quite a few boxes there, aren't you?
It's worth adding other supermarkets are available.
There is, yes, definitely. And you can go to Witherspoons, I suppose.
Yes, yeah.
As we know, but I think there's we can't be too negative about this transition to electrification. We know it's coming. There's a lot of work being done on it. We will get there. There are some challenges, and one of the final stories is obviously around the big car makers, but there's some good work. There's a lot of good work being done in there around EV and this education to the dealer network, the remarketing, and more importantly, the consumer's adoption of EV. So, there's a lot to be done, but we are making very big headways into it.
So the next headline is from Car Dealer, and it is, used car dealers have a key lesson to learn from the digital disruptors. So this is about...
Reversal, isn't it?
Yeah. Not according to Robert Forrester last week. So used car dealers have a key lesson to learn from digital disruptors. That's according to digital motor retail specialist iVendi, which said candid online used car and van descriptions that highlight scratches, dents, and other minor damage actually build trust between dealers and customers. So this story is really all about transparency, and it's the transparency in the descriptions and how you actually present cars, especially online, which is now pretty much the first port of call for most customers. They will see the car online before they see it on the forecourt.
Yeah, and I mean, there's huge amounts of development and AI technology going into all of this these days in terms of, identifying damage in the digital space. But I think you're right. I mean, this is all about this transparency, and there will be, dealers that aren't disruptors listening to the podcast this morning that have been doing this kind of thing for years. Imagery of the logbook, the keys, the service history, all the tires, and every single mark on that. But I think what is clear that the new entrants that have come from the pure digital space initially, that was their only avenue. There's no,
Yes.
there's no pre-viewing the car. There's no test drives of that vehicle available because they've just not got the physical infrastructure. So it is all about creating that confidence, and that is done through transparency of information, that giving the customer no reason to not buy the car. They know everything about it, and then it'd be a case of buy the car, pick it up, and they've got a period of time of driving it to make sure they like it. So there's a lot being done in that space, but as you say there, that one thing is clear, that I think say we've got to be disruptors. People are now saying, should we be dropping the word disruptors?
Yes. Yeah.
Is that now a past reference for these new entrants into the marketplace, that actually they're just operators, just they've come at it from a different space? But you're right. I think there's a lot. Rob Severson from iVendi making a clear point there that it is about transparency, it is about information, it is about getting the technical side of it right to be able to do that as well.
So you're listening to All the Chatter That Matters on Motor Trade Radio, powered by eBay Motors Group. This is your weekly one-stop shop for all the biggest car retailing headlines from across the media, available on demand wherever you are on your podcast feed.
So the next story is the exclusive that we talked about from Judge Service, and this is that the headline of the story, and is going to be that dealers in Scotland ranked highest for consumer satisfaction in Judge Service regional survey. I just wonder what people think of that straight away in terms of listening to that, header, Curtis.
Well, yeah, our Scottish listeners will be absolutely delighted, and I'm sure they'll be saying, well, I told you so, we knew that, we knew that all along. So, our thanks to Judge Service for the exclusive, and I did work with the guys on this release. So there's some interesting stats in this, and it's the first time that Judge Service has looked at dealer satisfaction on a regional basis. So, as you say, Scotland topped the UK's top 12 geographical regions with an overall promoter score of 83.9%, and it was followed by Northern Ireland with 83.2%, and the northeast of England with 82.6%. So the survey asked buyers to rank their satisfaction from 1 to 10, across criteria which included things like the presentation of the dealer's premises, the attitude of salespeople, choice of vehicles, the handover experience, and what they thought of the cars that they ended up purchasing. And the research polled the views of 65,000 buyers over the last 6 months. So this is pretty comprehensive, and buyers in Scotland actually consistently ranked their dealers highly across all the criteria measuring satisfaction.
Yeah, like you say, I mean, that is a hugely comprehensive survey there of that many in-car buyers that they've surveyed, and key information as well, isn't it, for the regions as to how they are looking after their customers, and how the customers, more importantly, see them. That's the key with this, isn't it? Is that what are they meeting the customers' expectations, and if not, why not? What areas do they need to focus on? And maybe the last story is part of that. It is maybe about that transparency of information, transparency of condition that many may need to consider. But yeah, great survey. There obviously there's as Curtis likes his top 10. Unfortunately, there's always a top 5 and a top bottom. In this, you've got the top 12. Unfortunately, that gives you a bottom 6, and there's always winners and losers in this kind of thing. But great performance there for Scotland in terms of that, that customer satisfaction side of things.
Yeah, definitely. And there's a comment from Neil Ladley, Managing Director of Turf Service, who was actually one of our guests just a couple of weeks ago. So he says this regional research provides a valuable insight into what customers across the UK think of the local dealers they are buying from. It's always important for dealers to benchmark themselves against their local competition and to understand the expectations of regional audiences. This is where constantly delivering high levels of customer satisfaction can make them local heroes.
Yeah, definitely. And the next story, I mean, we've talked about some performances from the dealer network recently, haven't we, over the last few podcasts, but we're moving over to a little bit probably closer to my area, Curtis, on this one, to be fair.
Yeah, your neck of the woods.
A little bit. We'd be careful. They are fairly well covered across the UK, but very much a northern based business. But they are Northampton, so that's where they are. But this is Perry's, so we're heading over to AM Online. Perry's delivers a 275% pre-tax profit rise in excellent 2021 results, and this is where AM have done a fantastic story here, where they've had an interview there with Darren Arden, who is the managing director of Perry's Motor Sales, and he's expressed his confidence at the tackling the car retail sector's headwinds after the business posted a 275% pre-tax profit rise from an excellent 2021 trading, and some great revenue performances here, Curtis.
Yeah, I mean, wow. so revenues of £600 million, 22% up on the previous year's £491 million, and profits before tax rose to 12 million from 3.2 million. So that's the 275% increase. In a year which, after all, started with the third national COVID lockdown and ended with the government introducing the Plan B measures, if you remember them. So plenty of headwinds, but remarkable performance there. And the piece goes on to share how Perry's succeeded in generating positive operating cash flows, with net debt reduced from 1.2 million to a net cash position of 3.6 million. And Perry said that its strong 2021 financial results had been achieved pretty much as a result of prompt and effective management action, which is something we've heard from a lot of the dealer groups, coupled with of course, the support of all its staff.
Yeah, and they did come through the year of 2021 trading with further expansion in its franchise portfolio, with addition of Mazda in Dover, MG in Aylesbury, Peugeot in Huddersfield and Bury, and opened a new Cupra showroom over in Bolton there. So again, very positive performance there. They do state that the new car performance continues to be affected by supply issues, with a number of manufacturers now pushing deliveries back to the second half of the year. But I remember us talking about Perry's, and the view was, their order take coming into this year was huge. So they are, I think the one thing to remember with the new car retailers at the minute, although they may not be delivering huge volumes of new cars, they're certainly building up a huge order take of new cars that, when they do turn into deliveries, they are going to be profitable as well. So, that's still there for the future at the minute. So, again, great performance there by Perry's.
Yeah, and interesting comment on their outlook for the second half of the year, which is expected to be strong as new vehicles start to arrive in greater volumes and used car supply improves from the receipt of part exchange vehicles. So, some positive thoughts there on the coming months.
And the final story of today, we've touched on EVs earlier, and we're heading over to the Guardian. This is, again, a very in-depth, detailed story here, but we'll try and give you some of the snippet headlines. But big car makers stuck in slow lane over switch to zero emissions, this study shows, and saying that only Tesla and Mercedes are due to meet climate goals, with Toyota, Honda, Nissan, Hyundai and General Motors all lagging behind that target. So very opening and interesting results here, Curtis.
Yeah, and some surprising names there that you've already mentioned. So the piece identifies how Tesla, of course, and Mercedes are actually the only car makers out of the 12 big manufacturers who are on course to shift to zero emission vehicles at a rate that's actually in line with climate goals. So this is according to the campaign group Influence Map, and it's based on research from the data company, independent research from IHS Markit, who we do reference from time to time on the podcast. So the car makers that plan the slowest adoption of zero emission technology are actually the three biggest Japanese brands, so Toyota, Honda, and Nissan. While the piece describes the other laggards, that's always a good word to drop into copy, included Hyundai and General Motors. So the analysis is based on forecasts to 2029 as reference to IHS Markit, and really looking at 12 of the world's largest car makers. But interesting, it does exclude the Chinese manufacturers, some of the bigger Chinese manufacturers. So it does say that Mercedes-Benz is on track to produce 56% of its vehicles being battery electric vehicles by 2029. So that's 56%, compared with Toyota at 15% and Honda at 18%. So there is a large gap here emerging.
There is, and I think we talked on it earlier, that there's still a lot for them to do in there. And, a VW spokesman is in the story talking about 100% that the rapid shift to e-mobility is essential to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees. And the plans to share of battery electric vehicles around the 50% by 2030. But BMW said that at least half of all sales being all electric by 2030, and Stellantis talk about 100% of its car and van sales in Europe and 50% of its car and light truck sales in the US will be battery by 2030. But that kind of doesn't align with the rest of the story in many ways, does it? There's a lot for them to do. So I say it's a great in-depth story and some great findings, like you say, Curtis, from IHS Markit there, that's talking around this, whether, the challenges facing it. And, we talked last week around the Future of the Car event and particularly around Elon being on there from Tesla. But one thing was clear, the message from a lot of the manufacturers is there's still a long way to go to get this transition to EV.
And I was particularly interested, it's buried fairly deeply in the story. So it mentions how Ford, which last year said it would go all electric in Europe by 2030, but on Tuesday of this previous week, it actually called for petrol and diesel car sales to be banned in the EU by 2035. And this was in a joint letter with Volvo and other leading companies, including Tesco, Uber, and Unilever. So, this just shows, I mean, it's like turkeys voting for Christmas, isn't it? I mean, it shows the momentum now behind this move. If you've got Ford calling for an outright ban on new ICE vehicles by 2035.
Yeah, I mean, what impact that'll have on the used vehicle market? There's only 330 million used vehicles on the road in Europe. So, that could be interesting, Curtis, because I'm presuming he is referring just to new and not used, but
I assume it is. It doesn't make it clear, but I'm pretty
exactly.
sure it is, because
Maybe he's referring to all petrol and diesels being banned in Europe, but that'd be interesting. But no, I think you're right. I think there's still a lot to play out here, and an interesting conversation over someone this week is around, we won't get onto it now, but everyone's talking about solid state batteries because of the range that they do, the speed of charging, etc. But we've not even sorted out the challenges facing today's battery technology and the vehicles in the marketplace, and we're already starting to move on to the next evolution of electric batteries. So this is the thing with EV, it's new, and it's moving so swiftly that basically, your early models, your early adopters are soon left behind in this world of technology shift that's happening. So, and the market isn't ready for today. And there's new technology already on the horizon that's on its way. So I'm sure we'll keep talking about EV and this transition to electrification in the future.
Well, you know what? I think it's a sign of the times in that probably 75% of the stories today have been about electric vehicles in some shape or form. So, if we were to look back 12 months or 2 years, that percentage would have been a lot lower.
Just a bit. So, I say some great headlines there. We couldn't get into them in all the detail. So, please do head over to the relevant magazines or websites with AM, Car Dealer, Motor Trader, Motor Trade News, The Guardian. Great in-depth stories there this week, and as we say, if you've not listened to the Robert Forrester interview that we keep rattling on about, but it is very good, please do listen to that. It was published on last Saturday's podcast, and it was published again on Tuesday morning of this week as well in its own isolation. So have a listen back to it. You'll find it extremely interesting. We will try and get a part 2, but we can't guarantee it's in the hands of Robert for that one, but we'll do our best.
That's all for now. You've been listening to the weekly Motor Trade Radio podcast powered by eBay Motors Group. Many thanks for joining us for all the chat that matters. We're back again next week. Until then, it's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from him.